So the reflections are starting to look a bit smoother, but as we rub down further, it's going to come out even better. Hello, this is BJ from Hearns Hobbies, and I'm going to look into the polishing of paints, particularly clear paints. And with this particular example, this is the SMS 2K Clear. Now, even though this is a 2K Clear, so I do have another video which explains what the 2K Clear is. It can be used on any painted surface, but particularly the harder painted surfaces, such as the lacquer type paints. And this is the 2K Clear, which is the epoxy type paint. So it has a hardener and the base, and then it sets into this really rock hard finish. Now, you may be able to see, I'm going to move it around to see if we can capture some of the reflections. This is straight out of the airbrush, and it does look very high luster already, although it does have some ripples in it. Okay, so quite often you'll be able to get a quite nice finish, but it won't be totally smooth and it won't give you that mirror finish. And so that's what we're going to look into today. We're going to polish it to get a mirror finish. So what I'll do is I'll explain what I have here. So here's our example, which has already been sprayed with a 2K Clear. I'm going to progressively go through and sand the surface with some sanding paper and sponges I have here. So I'm going to start with this one here, it's a 2000, and then progressively it will get finer. So from 2000, I go to 4000, 6000, 8000, 10,000. Now what I have in here is the sponge sanders, which are from GodHand. So they're the polishing type wet sanding sponges. I've got some water here, which is going to help me with my wet sanding. And then after all the sanding is done, we're going to go through it with polishing creams. So I've got the 3 different Tamiya creams here. There's the coarse cream, the fine, and then the finishing. So basically they're going to have finer and finer particles in them. And the finish is going to be the absolutely final one, which is going to give us the mirror finish. Now I've also got my polishing cloth here. This is a really smooth microfiber cloth. This particular one's made by GSI. Really smooth cloth is really important, because if you use any old cloth, you can still add scratches to it, which won't give you any benefits. I've got a little bit of tissue here, just clean up any splashes I might have of water. And then the tape is just so I can tape off half of it, so that once I take it off, you should be able to see a difference in the 2 different finishes. Okay, so let's start off with the tape. Let's just put it on so that there's an actual line so we can compare. So I might just do that down the center here, because that's probably going to be a good place to see any differences. See if I want to stick it all the way down the center. Okay, so obviously this part with the tape on it, that's going to keep this sort of sheen on it. And then I'm going to be polishing this part, and we're aiming for a mirror finish. All right, so let's just press it down flat. Probably not going to sand all of this, it'll just be a patch here so you can get a good idea of what's happening. Okay, so that's with the tape on. All right, we'll just press it down just so it's got a reasonable amount of adhesion. It doesn't have to be perfect in this circumstance, because we just want to separate the 2. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to sand this surface with the 2000 grit. So I've got 2000 grit here. Okay, this particular stuff is a paper. You can handle a little bit of wet, but not a lot. So it would be preferable if you could go all the way wet. Wet will give you a finer sand. Now, I'll start off with a dry sand and just show you what the difference is going to be like. A dry sand is going to give you a lot of powder, so it's going to start looking white to begin with, which can be confusing for a beginner, but I'll do this just to demonstrate so you can see what's happening. So you can see as I'm moving that, there's some slight ripples. Okay, so let's just give it a sand. Now the idea with this sand, so this is going to be the coarsest one I'm going to use. Idea with this one is I want to get the paint surface so that there's no more ripples in it. All right, so I'm just going to try and sand it all the way up to the edge of this tape, so you can get a better idea between the 2 surfaces. And you see how you got the white dust coming off? That's actually the clear. Okay, so it's just rubbing it down. All right, so this is going to take a little bit of work. Basically, when I'm sanding this down, when you look at the surface, you want to make sure that it looks even. Okay, so it's going to be an even, rough, white surface. Where you see the dark patches, that means that I haven't gone down far enough to reach the very lower parts of the ripples. So we'll just keep going at it for a little bit longer. All right, so it's hard to get up to the edge of the tape, so let me just concentrate on those areas. You notice that I'm curving the paper here, so that gives it a rounder surface. Makes the sanding evener. Okay, so again, you can have a closer look. So as you see, you can still see some dots. This is part of the orange peeling, and they're at the very bottoms of the troughs. And what we want to do is sand it all the way down to those, so it's a totally smooth finish. All right, so let's go at it a bit longer. Now this particular step is very important, because if you don't get it all the way down flat now, because we're moving onto a smoother and smoother sanding surface, basically all it means is if you leave some ripples there, you're just going to be polishing those ripples, and the ripples will always be there. So this is where we want to try and get rid of them at the very beginning. All right, let's have a bit of a look. We're getting closer. It's interesting, when you sand, you probably think, oh wow, that's a really, really smooth surface. But you do see exactly how uneven it is as you start sanding. All right, so I've got a couple of little reflections I can see there. So the shiny bits, they're still the bottoms of the troughs, because that's the actual gloss paint. So I'm just going to concentrate on those. So there's not many left, so just a little bit more to go. Alright, so I'm progressively moving around on my paper to get some fresh sanding surface. Because when you're using papers this fine, it does clog up pretty quickly. That's where water can help too, because it alleviates the clog, it cleans it up. Alright, I think that's pretty good now, just for that little patch. A couple of deeper parts I can't get to yet, but if I were to do this all the way, it would probably take another 10 minutes or so. I don't think we have that sort of time. So for the purposes of this demonstration, I think I might stop here. Yep. Actually, let's do a bit more here. It's probably better if I do a bigger patch so it's easier to see. Right, so I'm just enlarging that patch. Right, so it's got a few little sink marks in it, which we'll try to alleviate. Right, I think that's going to be pretty good. Alright, so I'll give you a closer look at that. Now you see how the clears come up on the paper, it's all white. And then you see how it's starting to white the surface here, because you're starting to scratch the surface of the clear. Now you will notice that there's still some sink marks. To do it absolutely perfectly, I'll be going a lot further than that. But even with what I've done there, you'll be able to see the differences once I polish it up. Okay, so that's at 2000, I'm happy with that. So from 2000, we're going to move on to the next one. That's 4000. Okay, so you got the 4000 there. So 4000 would be basically twice as fine as your 2000. I'm just going to clean up the surface there, a little bit of water, just rub that. So you notice how when I put water on, you see that really high gloss? Because the water is actually adding that gloss effect. So this gives you an impression of what it's going to look like once we've fully polished it. You can see that that's showing how smooth it is already. Okay, but if we just dab that off. So I'm dabbing so, because even tissue this soft can scratch quite easily. And you can see how the surface is actually quite matte there because we just sanded it. Okay, but if you want to check at any stage of the first rough sand, by adding water, it will give you an idea of how far you've gone. And that looks pretty good. Okay, so let's get on to the 4000. Okay, so there's a bit of fresh there. Let's dip it in the water. Okay, so the water's going to perform a couple of things. It's going to keep the pad clear, so it's not going to clog. It's also going to act as a lubricant, so it's not going to be as aggressive on the surface. So we're just going to rub that all over the top, over the area that we already sanded. Now you see some of the water's coming off with that white tone, and that's that clear powder, or the white powder that we had before. Now when you're wet sanding, it's very difficult to see what you're doing because, like I showed you before, it's going to just look really, really shiny because it's going to give you that clear effect. So to check what you're doing, stop from there, dab off what you've already done. You can see all that white there. Give it a bit of a wipe with your finger. And you can see where you progressed. Okay, so that's taken all that surface off there. I think we'll just give it a little bit more of a go, the 4000. Doesn't need much. And now, as the final rub, you just don't use as much force. You don't need to push down really hard. Just gently holding it across the top and just rubbing it back. And you see the little circular motions. That's to reduce any straight lines that you may be scratching in, and also makes the sanding much more even across the surface. Okay, so I'm happy with that. All right, so that's our 4000. All right, let's just dab that off. All right, so that's what it looks like after 4000. And if we put a bit of water on it, so that's looking pretty good, isn't it? So the reflections are starting to look a bit smoother. But as we rub down further, it's going to come out even better. Okay. Let's move on to 6000. Okay, so I've got 6000 now. Again, we'll get a bit of water on it, just lubricate it, and we'll rub it over those sections, the same as we did with the 4. And as you progressively get to a smoother grit, you'll even hear the sanding sound change because it's not as aggressive. Alright, so I've done that. Just wipe that off. Okay, so you really need to wipe it off just to get an impression. Okay, so you just want to make sure that you're rubbing evenly across the entire surface. You don't want to leave any parts that you're left with only the 4000 grit rub, because we want to get finer. So there's probably bits here which I've missed. So I just concentrate on here. And gently go over the whole lot again. Okay, let's give it a bit of a wipe. Clean it off. Okay, so progressively it's going less sort of white color and you're getting the darker coming through. So as we're going to the next smoother color, the color is going to appear to be more dense because it's getting less diffused from the scratched surface because it's getting smoother. Okay, so that was our 6000. All right, let's move on to our 8000. So it's all basically the same procedure. You're getting a bit of water to lubricate, putting it over here, and then we're sanding across the same surfaces. And again, when you come with the 8000, it's actually making no sanding noises at all because this particular grit is so fine. So again, you're just rubbing it over the areas where we've rubbed before, just really gently, because at this stage, if you apply too much pressure, it's just going to add even more scratch marks and it won't come up to your mirror finish. All right, let's have a quick look. Quick wipe. And you notice that we're getting less of this sort of white color coming off now because it's taking off a lot less material. All right, so As you can see there, it's already come up to a really nice luster. It is still hazy, but it's getting very close now, and the color's deepening, and that's what we want to see. Okay, I think we're pretty good. There might be an area here which I've missed. Just give that a gentle rub. Let's go over the whole thing again, just be certain. Okay, let's just wash it off. Alright, so there's a coat of water. See how smooth it's looking, that's good. Let's wipe it off and just see where all the scratch marks are. Okay, so there you go. So this is the basic area that I've been sanding. It's getting darker as we're going because it's making the surface smoother and allowing a lot more light to penetrate through the clear and bounce back again. So what we want to do is get the surface of the clear back to that super smooth. Okay, so now we're going to go onto the final sanding pad, which is 10,000. So again, we'll get that a little bit wet. Sand all the way across. All those little areas. And try and get it all the way into the tape. I mean, usually you don't use any tape, so it's a lot easier to polish. There's a really gentle sort of action. That's starting to dry up a bit. Let's have a look. Bit of a clean. All right, it's looking pretty good. All right, so I'm just going to move it around to see if I can find any rough bits, which I've missed. You see the luster's already coming up. It's super smooth now. Probably needs a little bit more sanding. Just make it more even, so let's just get all the way around. Now I've done another polishing tutorial earlier, and that was concentrating on clear parts. So this is exactly the same technique. I guess the main difference is the clear parts are clear all the way solid. Now with this one, we're actually rubbing paint. So you need to be more careful when you're rubbing paint because you don't want to go all the way through and get to the raw plastic. So hence why I'm taking a little bit more care, seeing where I'm going. All right, let's have another look here. All right, now you see that. Let me see if I can move it around a bit so you can see reflections. That's actually pretty close to original. Look at it carefully, you'll still see scratch marks. But what I'm getting to here is I can actually see the reflection from the fluoro tube from my angle, and it's actually looking a lot more mirror than it is from the rough spray already. And that's just by making the surface smoother, just with the sanding papers. Okay, so I'm quite happy with that. Now I'm going to move on to the final stages, which are the polishing compounds. So polishing compounds are made by quite a variety of different brands. I tend to get the Tamiya ones because they're a bit easier to come into contact with. And they've got the 3 different compounds. Okay, so you get your coarse, your fine, and your finish. In the very early days, I only had one, which was a fine. So if you've only got that, that'll still give a very, very good job. But since I do have all 3, I'll go through the motions and I'll show you what it's like. Okay, so polishing compound is very fine particles that are suspended in a cream. Okay, so this one here, actually, I've had this one for a little while, so this one's a bit crusty. Let me try and get rid of this chalky stuff out and get to the soft stuff. All right, so I've got a bit of the soft stuff coming up here. You don't really need very much, so that's all I've got so far. And I think that's going to be enough for this little small area. So just this little bit, because there's going to be a lot of particles in there, and you don't want to take off much material. So we're just going to concentrate on here. So I'm just applying it with my finger at the moment. This finger is quite soft. Okay, so gentle rubbing. Like so. And you can probably already see the luster coming up. And that's just with my finger. So the finger's actually, because your skin is soft, it's polishing, and then it's also applying the particles all over. You see it's collecting within the panel lines. That's not a problem. We're going to wash that out later. Now from here, I'm going to use my soft cloth and just give it a bit of a buff. Okay, just so like this. Okay, what you might see is quite a bit of white coming off, because that's actually coming off this as well. It's something I've used before. Okay, just a quick look. See how it's a much more mirror finish than it was before. Okay, that's just with the coarse compound. So hence why I said before, if you only got the fine compound, you'll still be able to polish it up really well. All right, so let's just give it a bit of rub more. Okay, I'm going to have a closer look, see if I missed any spots. Now, to be absolutely certain, I'm going to have to wash this a bit. Put some water across here. Clean it off with the tissue. Okay, at this stage I'm not going to rub it much with the tissue because I might scratch it. Alright, so we've already got a mirror finish coming up. Now the issues you can see here is I've probably not polished enough to the tape, because the tape is a bit hard to get up all the way up the edge, but I've got around the majority of it. Now it's looking pretty good. Now I'm going to concentrate a little bit more along this tape line, and then we'll move on to the next compound. So let's just grab a little bit more of this stuff. Okay, put it along the edge here. Now, like I said earlier, usually you don't polish up to tape like this. I can see it sort of coming up now. I'll have a closer look, see if there's any bits I've missed. It's looking all right. Okay, I'm just going to clean it up with this cloth here. All right, wash it off, a touch of water. All right, that's with the coarse compound. So you can already see a vast improvement over what it was before. Now I can see from here, the studio lights are reflecting off really well. Not sure if you can see that there, but I'll move it around just so you can see. I can see the studio lights really sharp now. And then in the areas where I haven't polished, it's got that orange peel, which you can see as the sort of rough, shimmery look. Okay, I'm really happy with the way it's going at the moment. So let's move it on to the next finish, which is going to be the fine cream. Okay, so as we're getting into these finer creams, the difference is going to be quite subtle. All right, so got that there. All right, now probably got a bit too much here, so I'm just going to put a little bit there, put the rest on my cloth here. So what you can also do is you can apply it to the cloth and use that section for polishing. All right, So if you've got it in your cloth like this, basically you want your finger over it so that you can do the gentle polish. Now by having it on the cloth itself, it's going to have a lot more action in taking off the surface. So this can be helpful when you're doing the micro polish like I am now, as you're getting into the finer compounds, because it's only taking off a little bit of paint surface at the moment. Okay, so probably want it to take a bit more so it's a lot quicker. Alright, so that's feeling really, really good. Alright, so let me show you there. See how dense the color is coming now? So that's coming up to the color density of the rest of the paint. But it's going to have this super reflection in it. Let's see if I do this, see if you can see the reflections coming from that compared to the other sides. So we've pretty much got our mirror finish now. Okay, the only thing is we're trying to get that luster back up so it doesn't have this cloudy appearance. Okay, so let's give it a bit more polish. All right, that's pretty good. All right, happy with that. All right, I'm going to move on to the finishing compound now. All right, so this is our final one. Now I'll do the same thing. I'm going to put it in this corner. Actually, I'll use that corner. Let's put it over here. You don't need very much at all, so that may be a little bit more than I really need. But you see how I'm putting it on there. All right, so let's just gently rub it in. Use my finger here so I can get it in a bit further closer to the tape. Very light, gentle action. Alright, so I'll start using this one here. And again, I'm using a gentle pressure. Don't want too much pressure. Otherwise you start incorporating scratches in it again. Right, so I'm going to have a closer look. Make sure it's all smooth. I think it's all looking pretty good. Alright, so this is pretty much almost the end of the tutorial. Now I would spend a little bit more time just to get it absolutely perfect, but it's already at a really good stage where it's going to show you what the finish is like. Okay, so let's just get a bit of clean cloth, do a gentle buff. Okay, that is finished. Now I'm going to take the tape off now. All right, so there's a little bit of compound left over in that crack, so let's just get rid of that so I can do the comparison. Okay, so hopefully from here, and maybe from the upper camera as well, you can see the differences between this side, which would be basically a mirror finish after I've sanded it, to the original painted side, which has got a few ripples in it. Not bad, but it's much better after you've given it the sand. So hopefully you can see all that. So I'm going to use all these different angles to see if you can pick out the differences. Hopefully that gives you the biggest difference here as we sway the reflections back and forth. So it's as simple as that. So we have a few polishing items. So I've got the really fine sandpapers, and then I've got the polishing creams. We've rubbed it back, spent a bit of time, and we've got a mirror finish on a painted surface. Simple as that, just takes a little bit of time.